You know, sometimes the biggest stories, the ones that really change how you see the world, are hidden in the most unlikely places. We're about to dive into a story that on the surface is about a piece of military hardware. But this wasn't some high-tech wonder weapon. It was, by its very design, disposable trash, literally made of paper and glue. And yet, this one simple object tells us almost everything we need to know about how wars are really won. It's a blueprint that reveals a fundamental principle of power that is just as critical today as it was 80 years ago.
So let's set the scene. It's March 1944. Deep in the heart of the Third Reich, the German High Command is staring at a puzzle that just doesn't make any sense. Every single day, the skies above Berlin are filled with American P-51 Mustang fighters. And these planes aren't just flying by. No, they are aggressively picking fights, diving into fuel-guzzling dogfights with Germany's best pilots. And then, they're just flying home, all the way back to England. For the German analysts, the men who lived and breathed logistics, this wasn't just a problem, it was impossible. It defied the laws of physics and engineering as they knew them. So what was going on?
Okay, let's do the math just like the German engineers did. They had the specs. They knew the P-51 Mustang carried about 269 gallons of internal fuel, and they knew the trip from England to Berlin and back was a grueling 1,120 miles. Best case scenario, flying perfectly, conserving every drop of fuel, that gives the Mustang a maximum range of about 1,140 miles. That leaves a margin of what? 20 miles? That is razor thin. It leaves absolutely zero fuel for fighting, for climbing, for chasing anyone. To do what these pilots were doing, it was a one-way trip, a suicide mission. And yet, they were doing it day after day after day. How? How on earth were they pulling this off?
The key to this entire mystery wasn't found in a captured Mustang or an intercepted radio signal. It wasn't in the sky at all. The answer was found on the ground. German recovery teams were sent out, combing through the fields and forest outside the capital, looking for anything, any piece of wreckage, any clue at all that could explain the impossible. And what they eventually found would completely change their understanding of the enemy they were facing. This is what they brought back to the labs. Not some secret supercharger, not an advanced new alloy. They brought back this, a 108-gallon external fuel tank. Now, the existence of a drop tank wasn't the surprise. The surprise, the part that must have blown their minds, was what it was made of. The primary material was laminated craft paper, basically super strong cardboard, all held together with a waterproof resin. The supports inside, simple wood. The fittings were brass. This wasn't a sophisticated piece of engineering. It was a single-use fuel tank, a disposable item you use once, and then you literally just throw it away mid-flight.
Now, the first reaction from the German engineers, understandably, was probably something like, aha, they're desperate. The Americans are running out of aluminum. But that initial relief quickly curdled into a kind of dread, because the more they thought about it, the more they realized this wasn't a product of scarcity at all. This was a deliberate choice. The Americans weren't forced to use paper. They were choosing to use it because it was ridiculously cheap, incredibly fast to manufacture, and most importantly, it didn't use up strategic materials like aluminum. This wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a terrifying flex of industrial power. It was efficiency on a scale they just couldn't wrap their heads around.
And that's when the picture gets so much bigger. That humble paper tank, it wasn't just a piece of equipment. It was a symptom. It was a single, physical manifestation of a vast, overwhelming industrial reality that was happening thousands of miles away. It was proof that this war wasn't just being fought by soldiers and pilots. It was being won and lost in factories.
To understand what I mean, just look at one material, aluminum. It's the lifeblood of any Air Force. In the year 1944, the United States produced 1.25 million tons of it. Just try to picture that amount.
Now let's put that number in context. In that same year, Germany, at its absolute peak, produced about 250,000 tons. The US was outproducing them 5-1. So you see, the choice to make a fuel tank out of paper had nothing to do with saving aluminum because they were running out. It was about optimizing that absolute ocean of aluminum to build the things that really mattered, more planes, thousands and thousands more planes.
And they did. Just look at this number, 881. What is that? That's the number of P-51 Mustangs that rolled off American assembly lines in a single month, January 1945. Germany's entire aircraft industry, with all its master craftsmen and brilliant engineers, could never even dream of matching that kind of pace. This all came down to two totally opposite philosophies of how to build things for a war. The German method was all about creating technical masterpieces. Think of them as industrial artisans, hand-fitting every part, creating complex, perfect machines. But that takes time, and it requires a small, elite workforce of experts. The American method couldn't have been more different. It was about creating good enough items in absolutely overwhelming quantities. Everything was standardized for mass production on an assembly line, built by a workforce of millions of newly trained, semi-skilled workers. It was the difference between a boutique workshop and a global mega-factory.
So, all these abstract numbers about factories and production lines, what did they actually mean for the pilots in the sky? How did this industrial tsunami translate into real-world battlefield consequences? Well, the effect was direct, and it was utterly devastating.
Just look at this timeline of Luftwaffe losses in 1944. The moment those long-range P-51's, enabled by their paper tanks, started escorting bombers all the way to Berlin and back, the game changed. The losses became catastrophic. By the summer, Germany was losing over a third of its entire fighter force, every single month. Think about that, a 36% monthly attrition rate. You can't survive that. It's a war of attrition that you are mathematically guaranteed to lose, no matter how skilled your individual pilots are.
And listen, you don't have to take my word for it. This isn't hindsight. They knew it at the time. In 1944, General Adolf Galland, one of Germany's greatest and most respected fighter commanders, wrote a brutally honest report to the high command. He said, flat out, the Luftwaffe could not win the air war. We lacked the resources, the fuel, and the pilots. The game was over. That simple, disposable paper tank had unleashed a relentless enemy that was now a permanent fixture in their skies, bleeding their air force dry.
So why does any of this matter now? Why should you care about a disposable paper object from a war that happened 8 decades ago? Because the lesson that it teaches us is absolutely timeless. It cuts to the very heart of how power, competition, and victory work. Not just in war, but in everything.
Here it is. This is the core lesson. Quantity has a quality all its own. Let that sink in. It's a fundamental principle of the modern world. Having the single best, most technologically advanced piece of equipment is fantastic, but it's almost irrelevant if your opponent can produce and deploy 1,000 good enough versions for every one of yours. At a certain point, overwhelming numbers stop being just a matter of more stuff. They become a strategic advantage in and of themselves. They become their own kind of quality.
So ultimately, this story forces us to redefine what a battlefield even is. The victory in the air over Germany wasn't just won by the incredible courage of those pilots. It was secured months and years earlier by engineers who designed for mass production, by the millions of factory workers who built at an unbelievable scale, and by the logisticians who managed supply chains that stretched across oceans. The war was won by the whole system.
And that leaves us with one last big question. A question for right now. If a simple, disposable paper tank could so completely alter the outcome of a global conflict, what is its equivalent today? What is the simple, cheap, scalable, and probably overlooked innovation in technology, in business, in information warfare that's out there right now, poised to completely change the game? What is today's paper tank?